is working okay. And I'll just need someone to verify that. Let me know, please, if you're hearing the sound okay. And of course, if you're not hearing the sound okay, then you won't be able to respond to know that I'm asking a question. Okay, excellent, excellent. Thank you, sir. Okay, so we have 3 minutes to go before the official start. And my goal is to answer as many questions as possible, touch on as many topics as you guys care to. And in the interim, I'll be also sharing some updates that I wasn't able to put on in a separate video. All right. Thank you, One Man Show. Thank you, Yokohama. Okay, 2 minutes to go. So to reward those who are a bit early, I will get started. Okay, first thing on my list, shipping update. If you're living here on Saipan and you are ordering products online, I did a short video a few days ago explaining some of the changes that are happening throughout the vendor universe. Vendors are shipping now to their customers in the United States through a service that the United States Postal Service offers called Ground Advantage, Priority Ground Advantage. But that is not good for those of us who live in the middle of the Pacific. So it's very important that if you're ordering from a vendor online, that you make sure that they know that logistically shipping by ground transportation will take 2 months to get here because it ultimately ends up going by boat. So the prefix for the tracking number that you may want to keep an eye open for is 9434. If a package is being sent priority mail to you here on Saipan and you see the 9434 prefix, that more than likely means that it's been sent ground advantage and will take upwards of a month to get here. Another prefix that I was told about was 9234. A friend of mine here on Saipan also had some delays with her order, and the tracking number in her case was 9234. So it seems like the 34 part might be the operative part of the prefix. So if you see 9234 or 9434, that may mean that it is coming by ground advantage. So another thing I learned is that, as I mentioned, many companies are using Shopify for their shopping cart as well as their shipping. Shopify offers a bundle of services, including not only the shopping cart, but they also provide warehousing and shipping. And if you see a tracking number that starts with 420, a United States postal tracking number that starts with 420, that's a unique prefix that is part of something called the intelligent package delivery system, it's IPB, Intelligent Package Barcode System. And that indicates that the next 4 or 5 digits are going to be a zip code. So if you see 420-96950, that indicates that the package is indeed coming to Saipan, so they know how to route it. But you need to also look at the next set of digits. So if that's 9405, 9400, 9402, you're good. If it's 9434 or 9234, then that may indicate some delays in your shipping. All right. So just a little bit of information there. Now, ask any questions that you like. The more questions you ask, the more fun we'll have. So that was a little shipping update. Also wanted to give you an update, quick update on the runway clearing on Tinian. I've had a chance to go to Tinian at least once every 2 weeks now and have seen the development. They're still clearing the runways. Last time I was there last week, the very end of November 29th and 30th. And runway Able, as usual, was cleared. Runway Baker, as usual, was cleared. Runway Charlie is still in the process of being cleared. And runway Dog was off limits. There were barricades set up so we couldn't actually drive on runway Dog last week. So nothing more specific that I can offer you in terms of what's going on Dog as to why they uh, blocked it off, but that's a little update for those of you who are following. Okay, that's a $440 million project. Yes, it is. Um, there are several projects on Tinian that were awarded recently. One was that the runway clearing, another one has to do with the refueling station being built on Tinian as well. So I'm not familiar with all of them, but I know there are at least two, possibly three or more um, uh, government-sponsored projects, military-sponsored projects that are going on Tinian. All right, first question, is it cheaper to sell your car and buy a new one on Saipan or to ship your car? The quick answer is it would be easier to buy a car here. You can get used cars in good condition. In many cases, people come to the island, they have a limited time contract, let's say doctors or teachers or other professionals. They come here for 2 or 3 years, they get a car, and they get another assignment, so they'll move on. So typically, there's always a flow of used cars being sold here, primarily Japanese cars, primarily Toyotas, but there are US cars here as well. A lot of pickups being sold. But I would say, based on what I've heard from people who have actually shipped their prized possession overseas, that it's much cheaper just to buy one here. All right, so that's my advice. And as other advice that I often give my friends is there's no practical reason for you to buy a brand new car. Now, I know my friends at the dealerships here may frown on that statement, but for me personally, just as a cheapskate, as someone who likes to save money, there's no reason to buy a new car, especially if you have to finance it and that sort of thing. So I suggest that people just look diligently for a used car that is usually in good condition here on the island. People drive very slowly, very carefully, and we don't have the uh, variations in weather from hot and cold and salt on the roads from de-icing. So the cars are generally in good condition. So I would suggest getting a used car here. How advanced is the healthcare on Saipan? That's always a tricky question for me because I don't, except in rare instances. For example, I'll mention it now. One of the reasons that my eye looks a little out of whack is because I had surgery, uh, a vitrectomy to reattach a detached retina, and that operation couldn't be done here. So I had a choice of going to Guam or to Manila for the operation for various reasons, mostly the expense. Manila worked out cheaper for me, so I chose that. So there are certain operations that are usually always sent, referred to hospitals overseas, whether it's or in other locations, whether it's Guam or Manila. So in certain regards, the healthcare system here is a little bit wanting, but I may have a guest on maybe in a future live stream who can speak more authoritatively on that since I basically engage in a lot of self-care. I do things myself. If you check out my AI Doctor channel, you'll see some of the gadgets and some of the protocols that I employ in order to keep myself healthy. So a healthcare question is above my pay grade, but from what I've heard from people, there it could be better, and many people who need to have specific specialized surgery are often referred off island. So if that helps a little, um, If not, email me at walt@DiscoverSaipan, and I'll see if I can uh, refer you to someone who may be able to answer that question a little bit more. Okay. The other thing, just as a little update, the tourism here on the island right now is a little bit slow. So at one point, I think last month, I read in a local paper that the hotel occupancy was only at about 46%. I'm not sure what it was for last month, but that's obviously less than 50%. It's kind of low. Most of our tourists are coming from Korea. Very few are coming from Japan, and we have a few coming from China. But tourism is kind of down right now, and the Hyatt Hotel, our only five-star hotel for many decades, recently closed, but is reopening under a brand new brand. So you can check the newspapers for information on that. But I think the opening was just earlier this month, earlier last month in November. So the building itself that used to house the Hyatt is still open, but it's under a different brand name. Okay. So keep asking your questions. I'll see. Let's see what we can keep going. Now, this is pretty interesting. Depending on what rabbit hole of news or current events you've been descending on YouTube, you might have heard about a story of a fellow YouTuber who went to the Philippines and ran into some unfortunate circumstances and is now believed to either have been kidnapped or more dire, more dire outcome is actually feared. So, okay, because this is a video for your questions, let me give you some quick insight into the tax situation, income tax, property tax, sales tax. I've read a bit. Assuming an American who becomes a bona fide CNMI resident on payroll, not a business owner. Um, Okay, a couple things. There is no sales tax here on Saipan. There is no property tax here on Saipan. And you and I cannot own property here on Saipan unless we're of Northern Marianas descent. So those are a few things to keep in mind. No property tax, no sales tax, income tax. You you would still file, but you would file instead of 1040. You would file 1040 CM, and there's a certain rebate that you're afforded when you do file your federal taxes from here on Saipan. I will include a link to more tax information, but if you check out uh, do a search online for the Department of Finance, CNMI Department of Finance, and you can get some information on the tax situation here that might be of help. And I'll also put a link once this live stream is over and once the um, link is accessible, I'll put some information in the description for you. All right. So one of the things that often comes up when I give advice to people who are considering moving here is that despite it being on paper uh, part of the US, it is not in reality and in actuality and in day-to-day life uh, just an extension of US culture. In fact, it's more Asian than it is US, and that's significant again. And the reason that's significant is because if you're coming here wanting to simply resume a familiar life as you had it in the States, the mainland US, it might present a challenge. Okay, so I was talking a bit about the fellow who went to the Philippines and ran into his demise, or could potentially have run into his demise there. And I watched that video. So others on that same topic popped up, and one fellow gave an interesting analysis and comparison between comparing the differences in worldview between Asia and the West, between the East and the West, and he narrowed it down to a difference between a guilt-governed culture and a shame-governed culture, which was pretty interesting. So he said in the West, in the US in particular, people tend to be motivated by a sense of guilt, and in the East, people tend to be motivated, and their behavior is dictated by a sense of shame. Now, there's nothing individually wrong with those two observations. Yes, there are aspects of U.S. Policy, the U.S. worldview, U.S. citizens, and how they perceive themselves in relation to the rest of the world that is based on a sense of guilt. And yes, there are aspects of Asian culture that I've observed that are based on a saving face and not losing faith and maintaining a sense of pride and honor without being and not feeling shamed. However, I think a more accurate comparison could be made, and to explain the reason why foreigners often run into trouble here on this side of the world has more to do not with the guilt aspect of Western culture, but more with the pride uh, um, aspect. So, what I've noticed is that when you grow up in the West, when you're born in the West, when your sense of identity is steeped in the West, you have a sense of pride. You have a sense of your importance over everything else. It's a me centric society. Whereas in Asia, things tend to be more of a collective conscious society. So people do things in Asia based on how it benefits the collective, how it benefits the family, how it benefits the state, how it benefits the country, more so than themselves, than their individual happiness or benefit. So the me in Asia is relegated to the bottom of the pile, whereas in the West, people are encouraged to stand out. People are encouraged to compete. People are encouraged to make themselves known to be better than the other. So the typical Westerner, U.S. person, for example, wants you to know that he's better than you, and here's why: because I can afford this, I can drive this, I have this. So there tends to be this what Easterners may perceive as arrogance when a Westerner is presenting himself to the world. So he's uh, wanting to show that he is better, and here are the reasons why that I'm going to make known to the world. Whereas in the East, it's just the opposite, where you don't want to stand out, you want to blend in, you don't want to be perceived as putting yourself above everyone else. There are people, I've heard stories, who refuse to be acknowledged for the good they do, or they refuse to be honored by their employer as employee of the month or something, because it gives the impression, and this is true for Pacific Island culture, which is part of the Asian aesthetic, is that it is perceived as you bragging and um, positioning yourself as being better than anyone else. And that, I think, explains more why Westerners tend to run into difficulty in this side of the world, because they land and immediately believe that the worldview that they've grown up with is the same here. Is that they have to flash, they have to lead with money, they have to lead with status. They, flash money, whether consciously or not, in ways that display and reinforce the perception of wealth that often then makes them a target. So, in my observation, that is the difference, because where the guilt culture that he talked about is true, but that does not dictate how the average individual interacts with his neighbor. It doesn't dictate how the average individual interacts with his boss. So, on a day-to-day interpersonal level. Whereas I believe that the pride thing is what governs more. People are more, Westerners are more prone to stand out and to want to stand out in the crowd, whereas Asians, being less confrontational, tend to do just the opposite. So that would explain why many people become targets. One, because it's automatically assumed that if you're a Westerner in parts of Southeast Asia, that you automatically have money. Whether you do or you're not, that's just an assumption. one of the reasons, the least of which being just the mere fact that you're here means that you had at least enough money to buy a plane ticket to get here. So, anyway, let me get to uh, okay, some of the questions. Do you need a passport to go to Saipan if you are a USA citizen? The answer is no. You do not need a passport to come to Saipan. I would suggest you get one. I suggest if you're leaving the continental US, and even if you're not, it's a good idea to have a passport. You never know what situations might come up, and you should have a means to flee if you ever need to. So you do not need a passport theoretically, and I've heard from one of our subscribers who has actually done this. You could leave from the mainland U.S., then go to Hawaii, which is a domestic flight because Hawaii is part of the U.S., and then go to Guam, which is also part of the U.S., and then come to Saipan. So in theory, you could fly from the U.S. all the way to Saipan domestically without need of a passport. And your ID, let's say you have a driver license that has that ID feature. I forget what it's called, but that would indicate your place of birth and your citizenship as well. So the answer to the question is no, you do not need a passport. Is there a company that delivers potable water to one's home? If so, do you know the name and approximate price? Yes, there are many companies. I think there are at least 10 or so, last time I checked, which was years ago, companies that you can contract with to deliver water to you every day. So those of us here on Saipan, we don't drink the bottled water. We use 5-gallon bottles of water. You might be able to see one in the background there. Um, I personally go to one of two stores that where I can take my empty water bottle, fill it up there, and only pay $2 for each bottle. However, there are companies that you can contract with, and I won't give any one company a particular advantage, but there are companies you can call and they'll deliver it to you, and they'll charge more. So let's say it's now $2, maybe it might be three to have it delivered. That's a guess because I used to have it delivered years ago, and then of course you may want to tip your delivery driver as well. So it could get maybe close to $3 or $4 per bottle. But if you do it yourself, if you're willing to drive your empties to one of several locations, refill it yourself, it can be as cheap as cheap as $2 for a 5-gallon bottle. So yes, the answer is yes. What do you suspect the reason is for the low hotel occupancy? The low hotel occupancy is caused by people not coming to Saipan. So, because of COVID, the island never really bounced back after COVID. So, at one point during the pandemic, all flights were stopped. There were no incoming or outgoing flights from the island, and tourism took a big hit at that point, and it has never fully recovered. Before the pandemic, we also had more Chinese coming as well because this is one of the only locations that's part of the U.S. family where Chinese tourists can come here without need of a visa in advance. So we had a typhoon also that happened, and even though that was in 2018, the big one, Typhoon U2, there was also a long recovery process as well. So few reasons why the hotel numbers are down is simply because there are not enough at the present moment Korean tourists coming. The numbers are starting to pick up slowly, but that had a lot to do with the pandemic and the hit to tourism that the pandemic resulted in. Okay. All right. Half a day per sunish. Okay, culture, interesting. Do you think the CNMI culture would allow an outsider to excel in a management role if they took a collectivist, team-based management approach? That is interesting. That could probably be a whole um, video. Do you think the CNMI culture would allow an outsider, an American, for example, to excel in a management role if they took a collectivist, team-based management approach? Okay. Uh, I'm going to give you the short answer is no. And the reason I say that has more to do with entrenched um, gender and role, gender and age identities within the culture. Now, I'm not an economist, I'm not a sociologist. However, I heard from one friend recently that he ran into some issues attempting to get things done within his workplace. And we talked about it for a while and narrowed it down to the fact that it had nothing to do with a personal bias necessarily against him, but more so with how things are generally done. And two things that come to mind. One has to do with the respect for elders. So let's say you're in a job position and you're that person's boss. However, there's somebody else on staff who outranks you, not in terms of position, but in terms of their status within the community. That person may end up having more influence and more ability to get things done than you do, even though you're the assigned person in charge. So I think that gives you a little insight into how um, status within the community and the culture is more important than your assigned job description. So there have been many people over the years who've attempted to impose a Western mindset, a Western worldview, an American way of doing things on the local culture. And I've seen it fail. And it's not because they lack the passion, not because they lack the enthusiasm, and not necessarily because they were being discriminated against by the locals. I mean, in a sense, I guess you could say they are, but there is just a certain way of doing things within the community that is based that is traditional, that is historical, and that supersedes and overrides any other expectation that you might have based on your job position or your educational status or what have you. So that's my short answer. I'm assuming there is a strong "you're not from here" vibe that's common in many smaller communities. I don't get that. There might be underlying, but we have so many different groups here. We have Chinese, we have Filipino, we have Korean, we have Bangladeshi. Um, and I mean, me personally, I know I'm not from here. So I was thinking about this the other day. There are some people who will say things like, you will never fit in, or you'll never, when they're talking about living in the Philippines, or you will always be an outsider, you will always be a foreigner. And that's, to me, yes, that's true. And because I am, I'm not looking to fit in to be accepted. I'm simply looking to live my life without a lot of hassle. And for some people, I think they are looking for an acceptance that I think is impractical because, as I joke to my friends, whenever I go to China, as much as I want to just pretend that I'm Chinese and live like a local, for some reason they can always tell that I'm not Chinese, and I'm not sure why that is. But so I know that I will always stand out in a society that I don't look like the locals. But that's not a bad thing. In fact, in a lot of cases, it gives you preferential treatment. Like when I go to travel through China and Singapore and Laos, the fact that you're a foreigner, a visitor standing out, makes you gives you a little advantage over the locals. So no, I don't get that "you're not from here" vibe in any negative way. For me, it's a given. But my experience is that it results in better treatment, preferential treatment, which depending on how you look at it, might be a good thing. All right. Um, so no, I don't think there's a "you're not from here" vibe. You may feel that yourself, but people treat from my experience, will treat you across the board with a certain respect and empathy and care across the board. Yes, there are certain little um, idiosyncrasies that people will focus on. Let's say between one group that looks at Chinese this way or looks at Filipinos this way, but that uh, doesn't, I don't think that affects, at least from my viewpoint, doesn't affect my daily life. Now, it's very important. Do not take my word for anything. Don't take anybody's word for anything. My experience will be different. My experience will be different because of how I see myself. My experience will be different because of how I carry myself. My experience will be different because I'm Jamaican and not American. My experience will be different because I was not steeped in American culture to perceive the world one way. So the vibe that I exude might be different. So um, I'm not American, so my take on things is going to be more from a Jamaican perspective. So take that with a grain of salt. Don't believe don't believe that someone's experience, just because they're a man, just because they're American, just because they're of a particular ethnic group, is going to mimic yours, because you also fall into that group as well. So let's move on. Yes, it's very dangerous in Asian culture to try and embarrass or humiliate them. They take it very seriously. That's what the fellow in the video was saying, that the making someone lose face in public is a very serious thing, a very serious transgression and offense that can have things go badly for you. So the best advice that I was given when I first landed here on Saipan was keep your cards close to your chest. And um, of course, if you've grown up in America, you may not know what that means exactly. But the short version is don't flaunt your wealth. Don't believe that your view is more, your opinion and your expectation is more important than what's been going on here for the last several hundred years. Um, and use your inside voice. And by that, I mean, on several occasions when I've done tours, I've had to tell my American guests, to use your inside voice when we're out and about. For whatever reason, there tends to be just a higher volume of speaking from Americans when they're out in public. I've gone to supermarkets, I've gone to the post office, and there's a crowd there. Everyone is mingling, talking, doing their own business, but the only voice you'll hear above everyone else is the American in the crowd. So um, there's a certain uh, humility and reservation that a reservedness that people here have that sometimes is a little at odds with how the Westerners present themselves, particularly Americans. So my best advice also, not every thought that you think needs to be said out loud. Your best advice throughout life, when you enter a room, enter a situation, take time to read the room before you believe that your voice needs to be heard. You can uh, go wrong less often if you're simply silent. There's no reason to have to speak on everything that you see. So, especially if you're coming to a new environment, whether it's Malaysia, China, Singapore, Laos, Philippines, is take the time just to observe and see how things are. And but this is tricky, you may often misinterpret why things are happening the way they are because you're looking at it through a Western lens, and that is often very challenging if you've never grown up in any other environment. Then you don't realize why people are acting the way they are. You'll use your filter to say, okay, it must be this or it must be that, because that's all you're used to. So part of it also, I would suggest talking to people who've lived here longer who can give you a little more insight into why people are doing the things they do. And it might not be the reason that you think. And I'll talk more about that later. Um, what day of the week is it there? It is now Monday morning at 8:31 a.m. Chamorro Standard Time. So That's about 14 hours ahead of Eastern time, and maybe what 18 hours ahead of Mountain Time. So again, it is Monday morning, 8:31 a.m. here. Interesting and gracious analysis of individualistic versus collective cultures. Thank you. Oh, but there's more. Is there any specific events that draws tourists from the mainland US? Are there any specific events here on Saipan that would draw tourists from the mainland US? Not events so much. Maybe the diving could. For many years, the diving community here has done its best to entice more Americans to come here for diving because I've been told, because I'm not a diver, I've been told that we have very good diving here. There's a very famous dive site, many famous dive sites, but one called the Grotto that has cave diving and wall diving and shore. Now, I'm not a diver, so I'm just throwing out these terms that I have no idea what they mean. But the challenge, of course, is getting here. It can take sometimes upwards of 24 hours of constant traveling and layovers. I've taken as many as 30 hours to get here from the mainland US. Um, Many mainlanders come here as part of a World War II in the Pacific tour, so that might be of interest. So people visit Hiroshima, they visit Nagasaki, they visit Peleliu and Palau, they visit Guam for the Battle of Guam, and visit Saipan here for the Battle of Saipan. So that's one, the historical aspect of this part of the world. A lot of people are not familiar with the Pacific theater as part of World War II, except for the bombing of Hiroshima with the planes that took off, and Nagasaki from the planes that took off here on Tinian, or next door on Tinian. So history is one draw for U.S. Folks out here. Other than that, there's diving in Palau. But no events, specific events I can think of that pull people here. There might be triathlons, there might be marathons, might be bike races, but most of those are pulling people from Japan and neighboring Pacific Islands more so than the US. If anyone out there can correct me on that or add to that, I'd appreciate it, but I can't think of any major events that would draw people from the US. Okay. It's hard for natives to excel among their own culture, so it may be very difficult to try this outside of the States. It's hard for natives to excel among their own culture, so it may be very difficult to try this outside of the States. To try what outside of the States? Just elaborate and let me know. The beaches in Saipan videos look very inviting, but I rarely see people swimming. Is that because only certain beaches are free of sharp reef rocks? The reason you may not see people swimming is simply because the people taking the photographs may not be out at the right time. So typically during the day, during the hot sun of the day, you won't see the average resident here at the beach. You'll see them more in the afternoons as the sun gets a little less intense and people will do their jogging or they're walking along the beach. But you'll more than likely see people at the beach more on weekends. So on Saturdays and Sundays, there'll be cookouts on the beach. So that's the time, for example, if you're here on Saipan, check out Sugar Dock and the beach there on a Saturday afternoon or on a Sunday afternoon when, let's say, after 3, 4 o'clock, then you'll see more people on the beach. And then for tourists, you'll likely see those people behind the hotels. The beaches behind the major hotels like the Crown Plaza or the Hyatt will typically have beach chairs and volleyball nets. So typically, if you're going to see people on the beach and in the water, it's going to be more behind the major hotels, and it may simply be that the photos you're seeing are not there. All right. I saw a hunting YouTube video, rota shooting deer. Yes, We have deer here on Saipan that was brought during the Spanish era. The Spanish were here from 1451 for 400 years before the Germans got control of the island, end of the 1800s. And deer are here on Saipan. There are some people who have deer as pets. I have a video of a fellow walking his deer at Sabalo Market on a leash. There's deer on Tinian and on Rota. So yes, there is deer here. Uh, was the hunter the okay? Um, yes, there was a local scandal with the local government. Okay, so yep, we've answered quite a few questions. We still have a ways to go. So let me get back to what I was saying. So if you are moving anywhere on this side of the world, you are, let's say you're in the US. I'll speak mostly to people from the US because that's, I think, who most of my uh, subscribers are. You are moving to the Philippines, you're moving to Malaysia, you're moving to Thailand, you're moving to even Saipan to some degree. Uh, there is a dominant culture, and it is not the US culture. Now, what does that mean? That means that certain things that you think are obvious, certain things that you've come to believe about society, about yourself, about male female interaction, certain things you've come to believe about how elders are treated. All of those things do not exist here the way they do in the States. Um, so you may come here, for example, and believe that everyone here is competing to stand out. And why would you believe that? Because that's how you were raised and that's how you were brought up. And as a result, you believe that you have to lead with your status and your success and your education. But that is not that important here. For example, as I discussed before. So um, confrontation. I've seen situations where people will be standing online and someone else will come in and just walk to the head of the line and no one will make a big fuss about it. Now, those of you who've lived in the States, lived in New York, know that that would never happen, regardless of how old the person is, regardless of what gender or what state they're in, whether they're pregnant or whether they're elderly, it wouldn't matter. In New York, everyone gets to the back of the line. Here, um, no one is going to, or very few people are going to call out. Uh, Maybe perhaps if it's a Westerner, if it's a Westerner who does it, then perhaps people will call that person out because now you've crossed a line where people are going to assume that the reason you've done that is to assert your dominance or your self-importance, over the local population. Um, so yeah, so there are ways that things are done here, ways that people interact with each other that will take some getting used to. And so my suggestion is just don't make, play your cards close to your chest and observe before you act. So anyway, let's continue. I've never lived on an island. I did once in an isolated city in Southeast Alaska. A coworker told me I would eventually feel a strong need to jump on a plane to Seattle for a couple of days. She was right. Do you ever get an overwhelming feeling that you must leave? Um, any overwhelming feeling that I get that I must leave little has more to do with my wanderlust and my desire to see other places and not anything um, bad about life on a little island. In fact, I kind of like the quiet. I kind of like the remoteness of it. I kind of like the fact that it's not a big city. And I was born in Jamaica and grew up there. So the concept of being on an island uh, is not something that bothers me. So no, in fact, I haven't. There were times where I've been here 4, 5, 6 years without ever leaving. But Yes, I've been told that island fever is real, especially if you're used to living in a big city or used to living in an expansive uh, landscape like the United States, that it does exist. However, for me, um, it's more about wanting to see more of Asia. So, wanting to go back to China, wanting to go back to Cambodia or Vietnam, and just experiencing more things. All right. Okay. All right. So, um, the question has come up. One of the things that I often mention here is that we don't have mail delivery here on Saipan. There is no at-home mail delivery. So, for those of you who are considering moving here, you will need a PO box, and you can sign up for one at the post office, um, and get on a waiting list there, or you can avail yourself of one of the companies that offers, let's say, $10 a month to have a PO box. So when you order online, you will um, put your PO box as your address, and you will get a notice that the pack, or you will track your item through the USPS website, and you'll get a notice that says that your package is ready for pickup. You'll go to your post office and you'll pick it up there. So there is no at-home mail delivery. And to answer and anticipate another question, yes, UPS, FedEx, and DHL also deliver here as well. And typically, what will happen is they'll call you, make sure your telephone number is on um, your order for your shipping label. And when the item gets here, they'll give you a call and you can go pick it up, or they can deliver it to you. All right. Privacy, safety, peace, and quiet are such priceless things. Only intelligent people even realize what true luxury is. Yes, I agree. Um, some of that is a function of youth, I think. When you're new to the planet, there are certain things that you feel you have to do when you're uh, brought up in a society that is focused on immediate gratification, that is focused on um, um, multi-channel social media, then you never learn how to sit by yourself and simply enjoy your own company, enjoy nature, enjoy the roosters crowing outside, and live in silence and sit in silence and just marinate in your own thoughts. So, yes, the ability to have silence, the ability, in fact, I've read experiments where people, self-imposed experiments where people have done their best to sit without talking for an hour, to sit without looking at being distracted by social media for, an hour. Me personally, uh, whenever I leave my apartment, I leave my mobile phone here. I don't travel with my mobile phone. The only time I do is when I'm giving a tour, and that's for emergency reasons. But I just leave my house, and you'll never see me looking at a phone out in public, um, unless I'm taking a photo, specifically have left the house to take photos of something. But yes, if you're steeped in that sort of culture and you can't stand the sound of silence, then you're not going to value the sort of life that living on a little 13 mile by 5 mile island can offer you. But it's not for everybody. Again, some people need more stimulation, they need more activity, and but I think for hermits, it might be um, a godsend, especially a Tinian or Rota as well. Can one safely ride a bicycle between Garapan and Chalan Canoa? Okay, can one safely ride a bicycle? Yes, you can, and yes, you will be able to. Right now, there is ongoing construction all the way from CK, we call it Chalan Canoa, all the way up, almost all the way up to Garapan. Actually, no, in Garapan as well. So right now it might be a little dicey to negotiate with a bicycle. But once the construction is finished, then yes, it'll be much safer. Um, and yes, we do have a public bus. After many, many decades without public transportation, we now have a public bus that runs from Garapan all the way to the south end of the island and then back up. So I think at last time I checked, there were two, one that's going south while one is going north, and then they switch back and forth. So we do have bus service, and I think it's $1 for a ride, less for senior citizens and less for students. I think students are 50 cents. Not sure exactly. But yes, we do have that now. And the system is being used. I've seen tourists, I've seen residents, and people taking it all hours of the day. So it seems to be working. Uh, do you think of it as solitude or as isolation? Is it a feature or a bug? And again, it depends on who you are and what you like. I like a little certain bit of privacy. I will admit, though, that since the garment factories closed, and that was a few years ago now, but since the garment factories closed and all the girls went back to China and all my dating prospects dried up, that things have been a bit slower here on Saipan. So, uh, and I don't, I'm more of a recluse. I'm more of a hermit. So it is possible to have a social life here. I'm just not the best person to talk to about that. So isolation versus solitude. It's a little bit of both. I have the benefit of not being assaulted every day by crowds that I can't avoid. I don't have people, hustling and bustling, walking down the street like in New York and cursing and pushing and at every corner. So there's that um, solitude that I'm able to get. I can pass an entire night and, there's no loud noises or parties going on except during New Year's. But um, but there is also, again, things are a bit slower here now. So for people who might want a little more stimulation, it might be a little bit of isolation as less and less things are available to do here on Saipan because of the drop in tourism. But that's just my take. If you speak to somebody else, they may have a totally different take. If you speak to someone who does the marathons and who does um, the hash runs and it does scuba diving, they can probably tell you a different story of all the exciting things there are to do on Saipan. That's just not this channel, at least not yet anyway. Uh, is that monstrosity of a casino ever going to open? Unlikely because it has been closed now for maybe a year or more, and it is in legal wranglings and things are being auctioned. And so, no. And I've been told that a lot of copper wire has been stripped out of the hotel. The question is referring to the Best Sunshine Casino. If you do a search online for Best Sunshine, you do a search for Imperial Pacific, you'll hear the story or see some aspect of the story of how the Best Sunshine Casino was established here and how it never really fully opened. It was supposed to be a casino and hotel. The casino part did have a soft opening and then an opening at its current location, but it quickly ran into issues here in a lot of different regards, OSHA regulations as well as non-payment of employees and then it never really got off the ground. So the answer to your question is probably not. It's probably not going to open or reopen. And unless they take my advice as a former civil engineer to do a controlled demolition and level it, it's just going to sit there and deteriorate over the years, which will be a sad thing. But um, I'm sure I may get some pushback on that from some people, but that's my advice. I may as well go on record as saying it that think controlled demolition and let's start from scratch. All right. Um do you know a good place to find statistics on cost of living? I know power is expensive, but rent is lower. I can't figure out groceries at all. The best place, um, there are certain sites that you can visit, but a lot of those sites are simply extrapolating data based on Hawaii and and other factors. The best way, or one of the first things you might want to do is check out my website, saipanliving.com. I haven't updated it in a while, but it could give you a good sense of some of the prices out here. I will also do my best to start doing some more videos on prices. Maybe I'll walk through a supermarket and show you some of the prices. What I can tell you is that, and I also have a relocation guide that was last updated in 2023 that does have some information that might be valuable. Rent definitely is cheaper. Gas is a little more expensive, but I think that balances out. I personally find living here much cheaper, but then I eat locally. I shop locally. I eat local food. I'm not attempting to maintain a US diet here in a Pacific island. So I think and I don't use air conditioning. So I think in that regard, my lifestyle might be a bit cheaper. But you can email me at walt@saipanliving.com or walt@discoversaipan.com and ask specific questions, and I'll see what I can provide for you. Or, like I said, I might do videos on certain prices of certain items that might be of interest. All right. As a health food oriented person, how do you decline food meals offered to you by locals without creating offense? Aha, okay, that's a good question. The question is, um, as a health food oriented person, that would be me, how do you decline food and meals offered to you by locals without creating offense? Yeah, that's a tricky one. Fortunately, I don't get invited to a lot of events, so I don't have a lot of declining to do. Um, after a time, I have to stop worrying about creating offense. And I think that's possible because as a foreigner, I am wherever I am, whether it's China or Singapore or Laos, or as a foreigner, you're granted a little bit more leeway to buck the norms. So you can say things that the average local person wouldn't say. You can mangle the language, and people will give you a pass. So um, at the few events that I've been to, yes, I've had to decline food, and I just don't worry about whether it causes offense or not. I try to do it in a very polite way. Sometimes I'll say, "I'm sorry, I'm fasting. I'm fasting right now." That works. That seems to work. Because some people, for whatever reason, think I'm Muslim, so they, if I say I'm fasting, that can go well. Sorry, I'm fasting right now. But sometimes I've taken food so as not to cause offense. So, for example, someone will offer me food. I'll say, "Oh, I'm fasting now." If they insist, I'll take it anyway. And then what I might do is give it to somebody else if there's someone homeless person, let's say, or mendicant who requests food, I might give it to that person. But so sometimes, in order to avoid offense, you can still take the food. And I try to take as little as possible because I might end up throwing it away. So, but I don't worry about the offense because for me, unfortunately, for the greater community, for me, my personal health is more important. So I won't eat something just to make someone else uh, not be offended. But that's just me. That's just my style because I'm very strict when it comes to what I will and will not eat. So Hope that helps you a little bit. So again, I decline based on do a fast, or maybe I'll say I just ate. I'm sorry, but I may still take a bento box and decide what to do with it later on. All right. Are there other islands you would visit in the South Pacific? Well, just for accuracy, just so you know, Saipan is in the Western Pacific. In case you're ever on a Who Wants to Be a Millionaire question, we're in the Western Pacific, but I have been to Guam, have been to Tinian, have been to Pagan. I want to go to Palau. Um, Other islands like Chuuk and Yap and Pohnpei. I think Pohnpei is on my list as well, and Palau. Those are some of the islands that I would like to visit. Um, so yes, that's the answer to that question. Is there much of a rush hour on Saipan? How long does it take to drive around the island, and what's the highest posted speed limit? Yes, there is a rush hour, usually starting at about 4:30 or so. And I'll tell you a little story. A couple of years ago, we had a typhoon. I think it was Typhoon Sodalor. That was 2015, if I'm not mistaken. And um, many people here, because their homes were destroyed, got the assistance from the government to the tune of tens of thousands of dollars. And what a lot of people did, instead of using the money to fix their homes, they bought cars. So there are those of us who lived on the island who saw a dramatic and marked and uh, um, discernible increase in the number of vehicles driving on Saipan. There was a time when you could merge into traffic, coming out of your driveway and really easily. Now sometimes you have to wait because there's a constant stream of traffic. So yes, over the years the traffic has increased here on Saipan, and your other question was, how long does it take to drive around the island? Well, if you if you learned how to drive in New York, as I did, and you drive at a healthy clip, you could circle the island, I would say in an hour or less than an hour, easily. Depends on how fast you drive. When I do my tours, I circle the entire island, but I stop along the way at about 20 or 30 different sites for the tour. So my entire tour encompasses the entire island and could take from 9 o'clock in the morning to maybe 3 or 4 in the afternoon. That's with stops. So hope that's not too confusing, but there's no road actually that circles the entire island. You kind of have to retrace some steps to actually go through the entire island. But I would say easily in an hour, you could drive. If you're just continuously driving, you could circle the entire island in about 1 to 2 hours. All right. All right. We're going to wrap up, folks. It's exactly 9 o'clock, so let's see what we can end on. Are there any hotels that offer long-term rentals? Yes, many of them do by the week, by the month. It's just up to what you can negotiate. And because things are a little slow right now, I'm sure many of them would be open to long-term rentals. So there's a friend of mine who moved here recently. He ended up staying at two different hotels. I'll mention them. One was Surf Rider. He also stayed at Century Hotel for on a weekly basis. So yes, the hotels are definitely open to that, and you might want to negotiate a good rate and maybe even pay in advance and get a lower rate. I did that actually for an apartment, that was a certain amount a month, and at the time I had a little surplus, so I wanted to lower the rent. So I offered the landlord if I could pay for 6 months in advance if we lowered the rate to X amount per month, and he was open to that because, as you know, money now is worth more than money later. So um, so that's something that you can do. Yes. Okay. All right. Let's see. Safety. Do you think a single woman would feel safe walking anywhere on the island after dark? Are there places to be avoided? At right now, because well, first of all, Saipan is generally a safe place, but there because of how kind of slow it is right now, it's actually there's less activity now. Up in Garapan, for example, it would definitely be safer for you to walk around at night. But just the question itself is courting danger. Why would you be out late at night as a single woman just walking around the streets? One, you're inviting uh, trouble. Two, you're it's such a rare thing. Pedestrians alone are such a rare thing on Saipan, and then to be out in the middle of the night like that, you're sort of inviting that people are going to assume that you are engaged in a profession that you might not otherwise be engaged in. So I would say be with friends as much as possible, or if you're going to be walking around at night, travel with a friend, or do it in, let's say, Garapan, where there's more activity, more nighttime activity, where you can be within eye shot of certain people. Generally, however, it is a safe place for the most part. But again, just like every place else, and just like the uh, fellow in Manila that we talked about earlier, a fellow in the Philippines, there are just certain things that not even local folks do that you should not, as a Westerner, find yourself doing. There's a reason why you don't see people walking around at night by themselves. If they do, they maybe have nefarious intentions, or they may be slightly unhinged. So look around at what other people are doing, and don't be the odd foreigner out and do things that are inviting trouble. Because, as my aunt used to say, you'll do things like that, and then when you get in trouble, you say you have bad luck. You don't want to do that. Um, uh, a midnight walk would be my favorite indulgence if I lived there. Yes, you could as a guy. I would say it might be safer. Now, again, Saipan is generally a safe place, but it's just a single woman walking anywhere out at night by herself. Just to me is just not a wise thing to do anywhere at all. New York, California, um, doesn't matter. So anyway, that's my take. Let's see. So on that note, yes, there are places to be avoided, but we won't get into those now. And um, if you do find yourself here, then you'd want to talk to some residents and get their opinion on uh, where to where to avoid. All right. So on that note, we're going to wrap up. I wanted to thank all of you guys for participating and asking questions. I know some of you have asked questions you've asked before. Thanks for that support. I really appreciate that. Some of the questions I'll get into in the next live stream. In fact, I may do this more often if there's a demand for it. I don't mind answering the same questions over and over again, and new topics will come up, I'm sure. And appreciate all the support. And let's see, what else can I tell you? Check out the subscribe if you can. Check out the blog, DiscoverSaipan.com/blog. Subscribe there as well. I'll keep people informed of things that are happening. Let me know what sorts of videos you would like to see. As I said, one that's now on my list is speaking more about the prices. So I could do that on a live stream, or I could do that as a standalone video, um, driving around the island and pointing out the prices of certain things so you can get an idea. That might be a good idea. All right. So on that note, thanks again. Won't keep you any longer, and I will see you guys in the next video. And hopefully my eye will be a little less droopy next time. And yes, my vanity is getting the best of me. So on that note, thanks a lot for checking in, and I'll see you in the next video.